Today on the Relationship Revival Show, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Sharp. Dr. Mark is a psychologist and relationship coach with a practice in the western suburbs of Chicago, the IKEY Relationship Institute. He works primarily with couples and singles who are struggling with relationship problems. Dr. Mark's first book, Not Lonely at the Top, a relationship guide for courageous, successful singles who haven't found the love they want, can be found on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. And he's currently working on a second, which is a guide to help people select a relationship or marriage counselor or therapist. He lives with his wife, Debbie, and two delightful dogs. And an interesting fact is he named his practice after the martial art Aikido, which he's been practicing for almost 30 years. You're listening to the Relationship Revival Podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. Mark Sharp, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our time together.
Yeah, me too. Well, I think we should jump right in. You've written a book and you have another one that's being published soon, or is it out available now?
In process. No, it should be published by I am aiming for the fall at this point.
Okay, great. And taking on writing a book it's a pretty big undertaking. So I kind of, especially when you're a therapist, it's like there's no delusions of grandeur of being the next Tom Clancy. So
this is true. You heard that little hesitation in my voice when I was giving you a commitment.
Right.
Not like the first time I done it, but still it's like, oop, there's the lump in the throat now. You can't actually put it out there for public consumption.
Yeah, you got to swallow the book whole. Yeah. So what's... Right. When I hear a therapist, a psychologist, or anybody in the mental health space or relationship space who wants to write a book and they have a practice, and I mean, at the end of the day, it takes time away from helping people. So I've found that 90% of the time it's because there's something so important that they feel like they owe it to the world to kind of tell, the story and kind of share the information. So first, let's talk about your first book that's actually available for people.
It's actually out and available. Yeah. It's got a long title, but the first piece is Not Lonely at the Top. And it's geared for singles who are happy with their life and usually pretty successful, but haven't really been able to find the kind of relationship they want. So it's people who really want to be in a relationship, but haven't been able to do it.
When did you write that one?
I think it came out to December 2015. So it's been out
it's still current though. It's like post dating apps.
Yeah. It's not right. Yeah. I mean, I gotta be, I didn't put anything in it about dating apps because, that stuff changes. It's basically about, I mean, the gist of it is, most people go out and say, I got to find the right person. And the first 2/3 of this book is about how to make yourself the right person.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's sort of some process to go through about how to date and choose people and whatnot. But a lot of it's really sort of look at yourself, be honest with yourself, figure out what's really important to you. And there's one section, I mean, piece of it's really, people who are really successful are used to controlling everything.
When you say successful, you're talking about business success?
I'm talking about life success, business success, whatever, right? I mean, artists, right? I mean, I talk about people who really have achieved, and they're used to being really in charge and controlling stuff. And a lot of the skills that make people really successful actually don't work particularly well when it comes to relationships. You got to be a little bit more open, a little bit more flexible. So there's at least one chapter in the book about that. So
what about people who aren't successful? I mean, I recently had a I mean, she's successful, but it's always fascinating to me, especially when I see people in their 40s, people in their 50s who've never been married, and
Right.
kind of dissecting why, especially women when they get into their 40s or even sometimes their late
Right.
30s and they realize I do want a family and what's happening, and now they're dating different types of guys. Sometimes they end up dating divorced guys when they never dated divorced guys. Why do you think that
Right.
happens? I see it happening more and more lately.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, let's be honest. Women, I think, have it harder, right? Because they have to carry the burden of reproduction, which is important for our society, right? And I think, and they have, since a lot of people, right, that's a big part of what they want out of life, and women have much more of a timeline
Yeah.
on that, and so they really invest. Men and women really invest in themselves and their work and whatnot and building that up. But then all of a sudden, women realize, if I'm going to have kids, I got to do something about
Yeah.
that. I mean, in the last couple of years, I've had several conversations with clients who've talked about freezing their
Yeah.
eggs, because you're right. Really, that really is a big thing for them. And yeah, I mean, I'm I'm an old dude, right? I'm actually 60. So, and I got married in my
Mm-hmm.
40s, and my wife got married in her 40s, and it was a first marriage for both of us. So we're like the weirdest couple
Oh
in the
wow,
world.
that's super interesting. I didn't know that going into this. So that you're kind of like
Yeah, no,
the prime person.
that was, yeah. And so it's like,
So why did you say single for so long?
I, it's a really good question. I really wasn't. I mean, that's part of where this book
Yeah.
came out of, right? I mean, I really wasn't ready for it. I had, I had dated some, but not a lot. But I was working a lot, and I was just, I guess I was smart enough to know that it wasn't really good for me to do that just yet. And I figured it out. It kind of
So
happened pretty
that brings up
quickly.
another good question, which is you said you weren't ready yet. What does
Mhm.
that mean, being ready for marriage?
You got to sort of be balanced in yourself enough, right, to be ready to be in a relationship with somebody else, right? And so there's a lot that kind of goes. I'm a slow bloomer at everything, so I'm not going to tell everybody they need to wait until they're 46 to get married, but that's a piece of it, right? I mean, you need to. Um, Oftentimes people choose partners based on something they feel like they're lacking, or they wouldn't tell you
Right.
that, right? But it's like it's to fill a
Yeah.
hole,
The
and
whole entire
you really need.
basis of imago therapy.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. And so, I mean, you really do well if you are whole
Mhm.
enough that you're really looking for somebody, and you know how you want somebody to kind of expand your life. I say good relationships make your life bigger, right? Which I think is true, but um, you need to be able to. The way I think about it is, if you have too big of a hole, right, you're leaning on the person to fill up that hole, and it makes it hard for the two of you to move together.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That may be too weird of a metaphor, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. There's so many books on relationships and on psychology that deal with being in a cave or being in a hole or digging yourself. But it feels that way. I think when you're
Right,
single, it feels like you're in this well sometimes, and sometimes when you're in a marriage, you feel locked in a well if
right.
it's a bad relationship or you're dealing with some struggles. So I think it's appropriate, but
Well,
it is
yeah.
kind of confined walls, kind of no way to kind of get out. Sure.
But and I think it's useful to distinguish between, you can be sad about being
Hmm.
alone and still have a happy life, right? Human beings are complex creatures. We can experience multiple emotions at the same
Yeah.
time. And so sometimes people, I think, kind of confuse that, and they put life on hold until they get that piece. And part of what that does is it shuts you down and makes you a less attractive partner
Yeah.
too, because yeah.
Along, in a similar vein, I've noticed, especially with some of my clients who've come through the door who are in their 40s, maybe one time in their 50s and have never been married, you close off, your life becomes so routine that you're not even open to a certain relationship. And I'm not saying that
Right.
happens across the board, but I think that is a challenge that some people have, especially women who I've had a few clients who are divorcees or even widows at a young age, and they just never get remarried, and they get so used to being alone that it's scary kind of to the idea of sharing their life again. Do you see, since you got married in your 40s, and I swear this isn't what I wanted to talk to you about, but it just kind of went there.
They always good. They always take their own path, don't
they? Do you find that there are different challenges at that age when you're dating than there are when you're in your 20s and 30s?
Yeah, I mean, not all of my wife and I didn't experience all of them, right? Because it was a first relationship for us. And so there wasn't like entanglements or kids or anything like that. I mean, a lot of people, most of the time, not most of the time, maybe a lot of the time if you're in your 40s and you're dating someone, it's somebody who's got children or has an ex or right. And that always makes things more complicated. Yeah. And so there's that. I mean, I think the piece you were talking about, right? The longer you live, the more established you get in your routines, and it may be more difficult to blend them. But I don't think that's the biggest thing. Most reasonable people can work that out.
I don't know. I've had some clients.
Well, there was that adjective reasonable in there.
Yeah, if you're thinking of ending a relationship because someone wants a different type of dresser, you might want to start, seeing a professional.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your new book. And what you're working on.
So the new book, I need a sexy title, right? I mean, its working title is a consumer guide to relationship counseling, and that's like, right? But really, what it is it's focused on helping people be able to choose a good counselor if they need to get into relationship work, counselor or therapist, and then also sort of an overview of some other stuff that might be available for them.
So what's your approach? I think that's a great topic. I always compare it to dating. So when I have my initial calls, because I turn a lot of people away that I just don't think I'm a good fit for. And I always tell people it's a lot like dating. We're going to have this first little quick call, and you have to feel me out just as much as I feel you out. Might be a good book title for you: Speed Dating Your Therapist.
Speed Dating Your Therapist. Yeah. But I'm specifically about relationship stuff, because I got some strong opinions here, so I hope I can share them, right?
That's what I love to hear.
One of my pet peeves about my profession, psychology and mental health, is it really, at least in our country, it's really individual focused, right? And so a lot of people who are therapists don't have a good skill set at working with relationships. Yes. So part of what my book is about is, right, it's you need to get somebody. I mean, you do a lot of relationships.
I exclusively do relationships.
Yeah, I'm the same thing, right? And so you need somebody who's either like that or makes it a big chunk of what they do, because it's a different way of thinking, right? I mean, I tell, part of my thought is, traditional psychology sort of looks for what's wrong inside people and tries to help you heal it, right? Well, when you take that stance in with a couple, you're usually just enhancing each other's negative views of each other, right? I mean, what I say is you really have to have somebody who works with what happens between you. I mean, I'm not saying that that's stuff, right? I mean, if you're depressed or you're anxious or you've got ADHD, you've got whatever diagnosis, that's not going to impact your relationship in some way, but it's fixing that's usually not what it is. It's helping people cope with the differences that they have. And so that's a piece of it. And I walk through some questions to talk to your therapist about. But then the last one is, right, don't choose too quickly, right? You gotta actually, because there's a fit piece.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have a style that works really well for some people. Does not work for others.
If you had to describe your personal style of working with couples, what would it be?
So style working with couples, I tend to be more
Mm-hmm.
active and right engaging. I tell people that what they do between sessions is more important than what we do in sessions. That our job really in therapy is to help you um, understand what you need to do differently, and then we set up ways for you to be able to do that outside,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, there's a lot of emotional processing stuff you need to do as well, but it's really about changing stuff outside. And then I tend to have kind of a snarky sense of humor, and some people don't like
Sure.
that. I mean, that's much more on a personal level. Some people appreciate that a great deal,
Yeah.
right? And so, if somebody comes in and can't crack a smile during a session, and I think it's just who they are, rather than they're just so sad they can't crack a smile, we're probably not going to be a good
Yeah.
fit.
Yeah. I had my very first therapist had that going for him. Dr. Derman. He was
Yeah,
great. And it was very early in my marriage. And he was a short, Jewish guy from New York
yeah,
who told me he used to get in bar fights. And like when I walked through his door, he's like, "We're not going to let you get away with anything." And he cracked jokes and called me on my bluffs. And,
right,
it's exactly what I needed. But on the other side of that coin, if my wife went to him, I don't think she'd last a full session. You know what I mean? Like you really do.
right,
And it's so my wife is a therapist. So she's on her way to becoming a psychologist as well. She's been a therapist for 15 years, I think now at this point. And she doesn't do couples at all. And she
right.
refuses. She just can't handle it. And and I think what you wrote about in your book is so pertinent. I'd love to have a conversation about this because I think there are two factors. Like one, on the business side, for a lot of individual therapists, it's just easier to deal with one person than two. They tend to stay longer, so there's less incentive to become a couples therapist because you have longevity in your business. And then the
Right.
second thing that I found is that when you go through becoming a mental health counselor or therapist or psychologist, there's so much schooling. And then there's the 3,000 hours, or depending on your state, even more. And then if you're going for your doctorate, then you're working for Bupkis for a long time, to actually get licensed. By the time you get there, the idea of
Right.
going and learning Gottman therapy on top of it, or
Right.
EFT or Imago, it's like, I'm done. I'm spent. I've spent the last, 10 years. I just want to start practicing. And like, it really does. It's a very specific way of looking at things. So and again, there's not a lot of incentive unless it's a passion of yours.
Right. Right. It needs to, right. And there's not many academic settings where you get a thorough
Right.
grounding in that. Right. I mean, I used to work in the community mental health system, and had, I had a woman who was I mean, over the last 30 years, most states have LMFTs. Well, you're in
Yeah.
California, right? So you guys have had the MFCC
Yeah. Yeah.
forever,
It's
right?
been
You
around
were
forever.
sort of like
Yeah.
leaders in that. But now most states have it, right? So supposedly marriage. And so I had a woman who I hired on my team who had a master's degree in marriage and family therapist and had never been in a therapy room with more than one
Yeah.
person.
My wife is an
So
MFT. She's an
even
LMFT. And
okay, right. But she
she
doesn't want to.
never in all of her training did couples. I don't believe. I mean, I'm speaking for her, but I don't think that was a focus at all.
Yeah.
And she started doing a little bit just because people were coming in for it, and very quickly, I mean, we're talking like 4 sessions or 4 different clients, and she's like, "I'm not doing this anymore." And she started just referring
Yeah.
them to me when I started when I started saying I could take some of those, and it works out because she's like, it's a whole different dynamic. You need a strong enough personality to interject and like mediate sometimes. And you have to like it. I really think you have to like it.
You have to like it. You got to be comfortable with conflict, and yeah, I've worked in office suites with therapists who see couples and who let me give you some quotes who see
Yeah.
couples, right? And I noticed that most of the time when they're working with couples, one of them sitting in the waiting
Oh
room.
my
They
God.
do it one at a time, and I'm like, oh, please don't do this.
Do you ever see half of a pair individually as part of couples counseling?
I do, but
Yeah.
rarely, right? my thought is if there's sometimes one person may have some kind of block
Right.
or something, and it's usually really around a particular skill or something that makes it difficult for them to engage. Like they need some specific work on some nervous system soothing technique so that they can actually sit and have a
Sure.
conversation, right? But it's not. But that's it, and it's the exception rather than the
Yeah.
rule. I don't do that with most couples. I know that there's the kind of 4-session assessment model that a
Gottman
lot
does
of
it a
people
lot where
do.
they do one
Gottman
together,
does, I
one
mean, that's part of
apart
theirs.
with
One
each, and then
together, one each,
back
and then
together.
back
Yeah.
together. And I'm like, you know what? I hope by the time we hit 4 sessions, we're running hard, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I
And
find
so
it useful
I
for
don't do that.
specific couples, but I'm with you. Like it's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
Like if they're constantly interrupting each other and I need to get clarity and they feel like they're not being heard, certain
Right.
instances.
Sometimes you need to, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But if they're constantly interrupting each other, you have your first target for
Right.
intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So
sometimes you got
what's
to
your,
understand things.
do you have a specific kind of framework that you work in? Did you kind of learn Gottman or have you developed it just through years of your own practice?
I'm not certified by
Okay.
anybody, right? I actually grew up in the field really doing family therapy stuff, so more kind of structural systems family. And when I worked at the community mental health center, I ran the child and adolescent therapy team there, and we did a mostly family thing. And I've had an interest in couples, and so that's really built. And now I've had my practice for 17 years, and it's been all couples. But that's been, so I've studied Gottman, I've studied EFT, Johnson. There's a guy around here who doesn't have a big model, but he's got I'm blocking on the name of it. So yeah, I've studied just a lot of stuff, and I blend things. I mean, when I think of, Gottman and EFT and Johnson are the big ones, right? I mean, I think Gottman does really a much better job of kind of how to do structured stuff around information and exchange and so on.
Yeah, softening techniques and all that stuff.
But the EFT gives a much better framework for sort of understanding and dealing with a lot of the emotional stuff that goes out. So
Right.
I blend
Yeah.
them.
You know what? The truth is, unless you are a diehard fanatic of one, I find that everybody blends them. I use like a touch of Imago. I don't think I'm the kind of guy that can have two people facing each other for a full hour, a knees length apart, and just like whispering suggestions, which is a lot of like but it works for people, and but the philosophy behind it, I love. So I use it. And I'm big on Gottman. I love their approach, but it's, again, you have to, there's so much of an art form to it in terms of working through it. And you mentioned that you've had a practice now for 17 years, and you also volunteered that you were 60. Is that right?
Yeah.
So what was your profession before?
Well, actually, no. This has been my profession. I mean, I moved into my full-time private practice 17 years ago. Before that, I was in the community mental health system for.
So how did you end up in therapy in the first place then?
I followed my nose, basically, right? I mean, I started I started college. Somebody told me I should go pre-med, so I went pre-med, right? And I was bored to tears. I learned in freshman chemistry it is possible to dream in a classroom, which is not a good thing, right? And so then I was like, well, what's the class that I really enjoyed the most was my psychology class. And then I started taking more and more and more. And, a bachelor's degree in psychology, if you follow that, usually people end up working in marketing departments. So I went to graduate school. Somehow, I don't even remember how it happened. I got exposed to kind of family thing and systems theory, and so I followed that. And came to Chicago because one of the best internships in that field at that time was that way. And I think when I was younger, I always fought the idea that our own pathologies lead us in the direction that we go, as therapists. But I am a relationship marriage specialist who didn't get married until he was 46 years old. Is there some connection there? Yeah,
Probably. Yeah.
probably. And so I was just learning, and it's interesting. My wife teases me now, right? She says, 60, you're having the retirement conversation. She says, you're never going to retire. You like what you do too
Well,
much.
that's one of the things that
And
attracted me to it too, is like I could do this well into my 80s. I can sit and, talk to people and give guidance and stuff. That's, it doesn't require lifting boxes.
doesn't require lifting boxes. The mind may go at some point, and I hope if and when it does, I'm aware enough to let it go before it starts affecting what I'm doing. But yeah, I can do it.
And you left a couple books in your wake, so that's the idea.
There we go.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're in the Chicago area, right?
Right.
Did you grow up there?
No. No, actually, I grew up in Africa.
Really?
So I have a weird background.
What part?
So I grew up in Kenya, East Africa. My parents were missionaries. They went overseas. They went overseas for the first time when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me.
Wow.
Right. So I was born in a little hospital in rural Kenya. And I grew up there, came back for college. So the church that they were part of had a school in Indiana. So I went to college there and then went to graduate school in Texas. Now I have lived in Chicago or this area longer than in any other place in my life. So it feels like.
Well, what was growing up in Kenya like, especially with missionary parents? That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. I thought it was normal because everybody else that I knew was doing exactly the same thing. Right. But, and in looking back, I wouldn't change it at all. Exposure to other cultures, incredibly beautiful country. Mm-hmm. I went away to boarding school when I was 8 years old, so that can be hard. And I know, I think probably the walls that I put up to sort of be protective early on are part of what kept me from getting married until I was 46 years old, right? But
very self-aware.
But I still, right? But I still wouldn't change any of that at this point, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a really hard question to answer. What was it like? Because it was right.
Life. That's the only thing you know.
But yeah, I think the missionary life is interesting. That I went away to boarding school, so I was away from my family a lot. But when I was with them, I probably spent more time with them than a lot of kids do, simply because their life wasn't as structured around a 9 to 5 day or something as other people do. So there's
do you missionary work, a lot of that is putting the good of the community or other individuals in front of your own. Do you think that's kind of a good training ground for relationships, or does it have like the diametric opposite where you're just kind of sick of it, and you want to be selfish?
No, I think it's a good training ground for that. I mean, there's kind of a double. As I think it now, there's kind of a double-edged sword of missionarydom, right? There's the service of others, but there's also this sort of, we're coming in to help the people who are less off than us. So there's this sort of hierarchy type thing that I think a lot of missions are becoming really much more aware of, kind of the distance and the superiority that missionaries went in with. And that's changing a lot now.
Yeah. It's something I never even thought of. As a Jew, we don't missionize at all. It's such a, I know. I always tell people, like, if someone wants to become a Jew, the tradition is we turn them away 3 times, So.
I know that. I love that about Jews. Why would you want to be a Jew, right?
It's not so easy. Think twice, think 3 times. And then if you bug us enough, we'll be like, all right. So, yeah. And, it's funny. I had another therapist on who specializes in high demand religions, like Mormonism and different things. And, some people, when they leave their church, and she even does it like for people who who've been in any kind of high demand culture, like an MLM, a pyramid scheme kind of thing, where you kind of sacrifice your individuality for this bigger cause. And so there's
Right.
a lot of recovery that goes in. And she says there's something like missionary guilt. And like when you've grown up in that way, if you decide not to continue in that path, there's this kind of guilt and shame that comes with this. It's so loaded. It's so interesting.
That's interesting. I mean, perhaps I don't have this self-awareness yet, but perhaps I became a therapist to assuage my missionary guilt, and though I'm serving in that way. But
Who knows?
Missions is an interesting thing. As I said, as I grew up, I thought that was normal. I went to boarding school. 90% of the people at the boarding school were also kids of missionaries.
Was it also in Kenya,
so
boarding school?
It was also in Kenya. Yeah.
And what was the structure like? You would sleep there for how many months of the year?
We had the 9-month school year was broken down into 3-month terms, and then we'd have a month off between it, which is pretty much the schedule that the school system in Kenya used. And it was more on a timing wise on a British type system, even though it was an American curriculum.
Interesting. Yeah. I have 4 kids. One's 8, one's 9, the 2 middle kids. The idea of them going to boarding school is, don't get me wrong, it's very tempting.
Right?
Just clean your room. I don't have to do that anymore. But yeah, I could see that, the family dynamic would just change overnight. I mean, it's a big shift. So you grew up in Kenya, you specialize in therapists, and you've named your practice Aiki after a martial art. So there's another little unfolding that I'd like to bug you about.
There, right? So I practiced Aikido for, I think it'll be 30 years this year. So I started when I was right. And Aikido is the peaceful martial art. I mean, philosophically, the idea is that you handle attacks without harming. You neutralize attacks without harming your partner.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And
how do you do that? First of all, if someone's attacking you, how do you neutralize them without harm?
Well, here's what's very interesting, right? There's a lot of stuff that you do in the martial art that I found was really metaphorical for what you do in relationships to be healthy, right? And so the idea is, instead of opposing the force that's coming at you, as you blend with it, you get off the line, you move with it, and then you join with it, and then you move it in a different direction. And so Aikido, it's Japanese, so I is harmony, ki is energy. So basically, I named my practice the harmonizing energy.
Harmonizing energy.
Harmonizing energy. Yeah. Right. And so it comes out of that. But there's a lot of principles you learn. You really need to extend into your partner. You need to learn to keep your own balance. You blend with them. You stay connected. If you stay connected to your partner, it allows them. You don't get so surprised by them, and you're less likely to get hurt. There's a lot of principles.
It sounds really beautiful.
From martial art that sort of make metaphors for relationships. And so the Do piece, right, is a Japanese thing. It's applied to practices that you use for growth, right? So there's judo, all the martial arts really are about a personal growth thing. And one of my philosophical ideas is that in a healthy relationship, your partner really helps you grow. You help each other grow, and that's what you really ought to be striving for.
Yeah, and you allow them to influence you in that way, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So interesting. Well, if you want to get in touch more with Dr. Mark Sharp, you can find him at Facebook, facebook.com/Aiki Relationship Institute. And Aiki, for those of you like me who would never spell it right to begin with, is AIKI. So AIKI Relationship Institute on Facebook, or you can find him on Twitter. His handle is Dr. Mark Aiki, and Mark is MARK. So Dr. Mark, DR MARK AIKI. And whatever the title of the book is, when you finally land on it, I'm excited to let people know. But I'm sure you can find his first book on Amazon and wherever books are sold.
Yep.
Dr. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.